Larysa, thank you so much for joining me on the program again. Reflecting on the last 2 years, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the experiences you've had and what's currently happening in your life as it relates to the Ukrainian war. How have you been, and how has your family been doing during this war?
Thanks for inviting me to come on again. It's been a hard 2 years, but it's also been a hard 10 years. If you recall, when we spoke the last time, I talked about my cousin who had been killed in that first year, a West Point graduate, so an American like me, and he was volunteering in Ukraine and was going through the process of developing Ukrainian citizenship. Just was so dedicated to the democratic process in Ukraine, and he paid dearly for it. So we have traveled to Ukraine a good number of times for his funeral, for his memorial service. For the 5-year anniversary, there was a museum exhibit in Kyiv that documented the time that he spent in Ukraine. So we've been occupied with that. The other people in the family have stepped up as well. There's a foundation that my cousins formed in his name, the Markian Poslavsky Fund, and they were able to set up a wing of a rehab hospital in Lviv for the purposes of helping the soldiers who were coming back from the war. And this is that first part of the invasion that in the Donbass area and Crimea that the Russians invaded 10 years ago. And now in the last 2 years, we unfortunately have lost friends. The fellow that my cousin was actually shielding when the missile came over that hit him, he was shielding a friend, and that friend has since died. There was a journalist who documented my cousin's journey, but so many, he talked about Ilovaisk in general, what happened when the Russians attacked a column of people who were retreating. They were leaving the Ilovaisk area, and the Russians attacked that column. This was after my cousin had been killed, so it didn't directly affect us, but this journalist was there. And then when Russia attacked near Kyiv, he went to do investigative journalism, and he was murdered. We've personally suffered the loss of people that we knew. My son has been to Ukraine a couple of times now to do surgery. He went a few months ago to Lviv, and the doctors who were working in hospitals all across Ukraine are being called to the front. So surgeries that need to be done on pediatric patients, they rely on the expertise, on the generosity, on the equipment that people from the United States and other countries from the European Union have been providing. Thankfully, people are not forgetting. Thank you for
Yeah, you
bringing
think
attention to it again, Patricio.
you just brought up a good point that doctors are being sent to the front line. So there is everyday life things that are still going on in the country and surgeries that had to be performed. So you're saying your son is one of those doctors who came in, stepped up, and stepped in to help that short gap that's been created for this war. So, what are your thoughts on the current state discussions in the U.S. In Congress when it comes to support for Ukraine? There is some bipartisan support for Ukraine, but I've heard some Republicans express concerns on what the long term sustainability of the support can look like, and so I just want your thoughts about that. And it seems like talks have stalled somewhat as we're recording this on Monday. Talks have stalled on the support of Ukraine. Just want to see what your thoughts on it.
It's complex. We have some very strong support for the bill for Ukraine aid. It Congress is multi-layered, and it's a complicated issue. Democratic caucus is definitely behind aiding Ukraine. There's no question about it. Numerous Congress and women and senators have been to Ukraine, and they know what the situation is. A number of Republican senators and congressmen have also been to Ukraine, and they are stalwart in their support of Ukraine, and we thank them for that support. But the leadership of the House, Speaker Johnson, and some of our congressmen even in New York State are not supporting it. And part of the reason that they're not supporting it is because they're towing the line that a certain faction in Republican politics is promoting, which is don't give them the aid. We should focus on the border. We can do both. The United States can do both, and they have been doing both, but aid to Ukraine is of absolute necessity. It's not going to last forever. Contrary to what some of these people are saying, it will not last forever because either Russia is going to they're going to promote with the countries that support them. They're going to get that support, and they will overrun Ukraine. And so many people, the country will die, democracy will die. Other countries that are in the near sphere of Ukraine will be subject to recriminations and possible invasion. So that's one scenario if Ukraine does not get aid. Another scenario is Ukraine will keep fighting. It will continue to weaken Russia, but it will take so much more time to do it. And why? There is absolutely no reason to prolong this. The murder of Ukrainian civilians and the loss of Ukrainian military. There's so much that can be done if Ukraine is aided by not just the European Union, which is definitely stepping up because they feel the danger on their doorstep, but the United States really needs to step up to not provide the aid for political reasons is criminal. It's genocidal. It's something that the United States should not be playing games with. I know that the White House is very serious about supporting Ukraine. I just wish that my congressman would step up, Congressman Molinaro, and tell Johnson that he needs to put this bill to a vote on the floor of Congress. So Congressman Molinaro, I'm speaking to you specifically. Please ask Mr. Johnson, Speaker Johnson, to put this to a vote on the floor. It will pass.
On the international support, how do you think the international support for Ukraine evolved over this 2 years? And how do you think that sort of impacted what's happening on the ground?
The support from the European Union, from all of the countries that have now joined NATO and are part of the European Union, has been tremendous. The United Kingdom separately has stepped up. The countries of the Balkan countries, they're sending their own F-16s. They have F-16s in their squads. And Denmark, for example, is sending all of its F-16s to help the Ukrainian Air Force. United States, where are you? They feel the pressure, especially the countries that are the Baltic countries, the Balkan countries. They all are in close proximity. Even Hungary, which just now agreed to let Sweden become part of NATO. These are things that they'll resist for a while. They'll grandstand, but when they understand how it's going to impact them in the near term, they do agree to do the right thing. Now, in the United States, these long-range missiles, if Russia decides that it's going to get even more out of control, the weapons that they have can easily reach the United States. If we're talking about a doomsday scenario, the United States is not immune. Plus, everything is global now. We are part in our economy, in our trade routes, in our culture, even in tourism. There's so many aspects of United States citizens being global citizens already, that to be so limited in your worldview, to say that we are just going to stay in our little corner and just think about the Mexican border, is very provincial. It's something that is really hard to understand, but it's the mentality of a small group, and unfortunately, they're playing politics with this.
When the invasion first broke out, there was a lot of humanitarian efforts here locally happening, supporting the efforts that was going on in Ukraine. Can you give us an update on that, of where we are as far as humanitarian efforts here locally that are happening, that could be happening, that we may not be aware of?
I want to bring up two organizations. One is the Ukrainian National Women's League of America, of which I'm a member, and they continue to do wonderful work, humanitarian work, supporting to the children, the return of children who have been abducted, providing still first aid kits, the individual first aid kits that every organization, the Scout, anybody who collects for anything, provide these kits for the soldiers, which the kinds of injuries that they sustain out in the field have been life-saving. There are also slightly larger field hospitals that need to be supported that some of these organizations provide. But another organization I want to mention is Razom for Ukraine, RAZOM for Ukraine. Just yesterday, I contacted my congressman, Molinaro, and my senators to assure that they provide aid to Ukraine in Congress, through Congress. They're doing that sort of outreach, which is very important. It's a phone call or it's an email that you can just write by going to their website. They also collect donations. They have done a tremendous amount of work. One of my colleagues made a large donation to them after I had made a request for supporting Ukraine. I'm so thrilled. People will step up. People are supporting Ukraine still.
Just looking back in the past 2 years, what lessons do you think the international community and us here locally could take away from the Ukraine conflict, especially in terms of security, diplomacy, and support for democratic institutions like that?
I think that one of the things that we in the United States have been lacking is the education, world history, world geography, world civics, global civics. Unfortunately, I think that schools in the United States don't educate enough about the world. So that would be something that the educational system really could benefit from, is a tweak in their curriculum. They do a very good job, for sure, but that the curriculum could include more about the globe, world history, world geography, culture. So that's at the very basic level. And then I'm very thrilled with some of our Congress, people like Pat Ryan, who is a congressman from the 18th Congressional District. He's a West Point graduate as well. He represents that area now in Congress. He is just so well educated, so well versed in what is happening in the world. He volunteered quite a bit in places like in the East, or served, I should say. He did a couple of tours of duty there. So our military, any military people that I have spoken to are very well versed in what is needed for Ukraine. And not just if you're a general being one of the spokespeople on TV. I'm talking about run of the average soldiers understand what is happening in that part of the world. So listen more to our military, because they understand the situation and they would say, help Ukraine. Something else that I've noticed is how giving the people in Europe are in supporting refugees. It hasn't been easy or smooth for them either, because they've accepted so many refugees, but they're still socially supporting them, offering them jobs. United States, I have to say that there was a program for the refugees so that they could obtain work visas on a shortened span of time. So the United States has helped with that. Wherever they can, they have helped. But this one roadblock in Congress is just beyond the pale.
Where do we go from here? I remember this one of the questions I asked you last time is where do we go from here? And you at that time you were obviously still are strong support that America needed to step up more and step up with not only just financial support but also military support and planes and things like that. So I ask you again, where do we go from here?
One time, one of our conversations, I had mentioned that my cousin wasn't the only military type person who has volunteered in the military in Ukraine for that international force. As we've heard now, there have been quite a few. I'm not suggesting people en masse go to volunteer into the military, but that is an option. And again, thank goodness for the military men and women in the United States who understand the situation. We can continue supporting financially with the donations through organizations like the Ukrainian National Women's League of America and Razom for Ukraine. And finally, to tell your Congress members that this is very important for our democracy, to support the democracy in Ukraine in order to allow our democracy to flourish.
Thank you so much, Dr. Larysa Dyrszka, for talking to us, let us know about your experience. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking your time and again telling your story again of what's happening in Ukraine and how it's affecting you personally and what's happening with your family there in back home.
Thank you, Patricio.